Welcome back to TechSparks, the 11th edition, and you're with your stories. Business editor Vishal Krishna, and today I've got a panel of VCs and accelerators for you, people who've been running their global programs. They're going to come and tell us about building global synergies and enabling innovations in a post-pandemic era. So you're going to get a pragmatic and objective view of the opportunities and challenges with global integration in a post-pandemic world. Let me introduce my panelists. Okay, I've got William Bao Bean, who's a general partner at SOSV, the accelerator VC with 700 million under management. He is also the managing director of China Accelerator, SSOV's global internet accelerator and the first accelerator to launch in Asia. And he's also the managing director of MOX, the mobile-only accelerator with 160 million smartphone users on its platform. SOSV is the #1 most active seed investor in the world, according to TechCrunch and Crunchbase. Okay, I've got Anup Jain. Anup is the managing partner at Orios Venture Partners. He leads Orios' FMCG and retail investments and has over 20 years of experience of building brands across countries and categories. I've got Radhika Malik, who's the investment manager at Samsung Catalyst Fund, Samsung Electronics Evergreen Multi-Stage Venture Capital Fund that invests in the new data economy and strategic ideas for Samsung's mobile device solutions and consumer electronics group. And I've got my dear friend Abhay Tandon with me. Abhay Tandon is a director and head of Lowe's Innovation Labs India, focused on building the future of home improvement. Lowe's Innovation Labs is exploring how emerging technologies can advance home improvement, rapidly prototype solutions, and put them to the test in a real world. And also scale these solutions. They've also sent a 3D printer to space, so that tells you something about them, right? Okay, so welcome everybody from all the way from California to Shanghai, New Delhi, and Bangalore. How are you guys? All good?
Yeah, great, Vishal. Thank you for having us.
No, yeah, thank you for being here. And I want to start, Radhika, when you talk about opportunities in a post-pandemic world and building global synergies, enabling innovations, what do you mean by that from a Samsung's perspective?
Well, Samsung itself, right? Samsung is a global brand, global company. So from Samsung's perspective, I think very different perspective from the startup perspective. Samsung has businesses throughout the world. For them, they're closely watching every market, building technologies for each market. I think where our team, what we're thinking about is, we're one of Samsung's corporate strategic funds. So we're thinking about new technologies, new products, 2, 3, 5 years down the line, and enabling the startups building those products and technologies to effectively work with a global corporate company like Samsung. And what we're seeing, we're a global fund. We have teams, our investment teams in North America, Israel, Europe, and we have obviously our HQ is in Korea. So when we think about investing, we're thinking about investing across these major geographies and working with the right partners in every geography as well. And I think the challenge for startups building in this post-pandemic area is, in some grounds, the boundaries are actually less. Like I could be in California, you could be in Bangalore, William's in Shanghai. Doesn't matter where you are, you can build a company and you can build a team. Doesn't matter where your teammates are. Remote collaboration is much more possible today with the future's been accelerated almost 5 years, it seems, in the last 7 months. Yeah. But there's challenges around each region's navigating the pandemic very differently. There's localization trends that are happening, which poses, supply chain challenges, for example. And as a large company, I think Samsung's built the resilience over many years to tackle many of these challenges, but startups, many of them early stage ones, are just beginning to navigate that. So I think the next few months is going to be a very interesting times to see how they navigate such challenges.
William, you gave us a very interesting perspective on, the post-pandemic globalization, a very different view of the world in terms of, you're saying every country is buckling down, regulation is coming back. What are your thoughts, William? And a little bit about SOSV before we start up. Pardon me.
We're, as of the last quarter, the #1 most active VC in the world. According to Mint, I think we're #5 most active VC in India. Started investing in India Internet in 2005 with Rediff and OnMobile and Naukri, InfoEdge. So it's been a long journey. We've come a long way. I think the biggest challenge that we're seeing now is just managing the growth. Okay, so challenges in the past where customer acquisition cost is super high. And what we do with Mox, our mobile accelerator, is bring, through our partnerships with companies like Samsung, the customer acquisition cost down to zero for consumer apps and consumer services. So when you don't have to pay for advertising, you can scale. So yeah, we've got almost 150 million users now on the Mox platform. The key thing is that in the last 12 months, we went from 5 million monthly active users to 55 million monthly active users. Those are real users, about half of them in India.
Okay.
Customer acquisition cost is lower. And so that plus the changes in the environment, a lot of the competition in India just like disappeared a couple months ago. So we're having a huge amount of difficulty balancing and growth. I mean, one of our companies is doubled in the last 3 months in terms of users and active users, daily active users, almost 4 million, and a third of the company has COVID. So it's a very challenging time. So for startups, it's hard. You're either trying to struggle with no growth, or you have the opposite problem, which most of our companies have right now, is there's just too much growth to handle.
And there's too much growth to handle, and also the fact that you said, talking about globalization itself, you're saying that there's a lot of clamping down and governments are clamping down. Is that true generally, or is it just a short-term blip because of the pandemic?
I am not an expert on geopolitics here.
Okay.
I would say that we're seeing barriers increasingly going up. For us at SOSV and Mox, we help startup companies go cross-border. So we're experts at penetrating through these bubbles that are being and are on the internet. But I can see that it's getting tougher. So if you're a company that wants to enter the U.S. market from India, not so hard, but from other countries, harder. If you want to enter the India market from Southeast Asia or the U.S., it's easier, but if from other markets, it's harder. So the walls are going up.
About your views in the last 6 months, how has Lowe's handled the whole thing? And you work with a global team.
Sure, Vishal. So just to provide a little bit of context, right? Lowe's is a Fortune 40 company with a top line of about $75 billion, right? And in fact, the second largest home improvement retailer globally, catering to about 18 million customers every week across our omni-channel presence of 2,200 plus stores across US and Canada, plus the .com business. I think we are in a very good situation when we talk about how Lowe's has been able to pivot very, very quickly to adapt to the ever-changing needs of the consumers. Given the fact that the last few years we've been working constantly towards upgrading our technology backbone, right? And because of that, because of the pandemic situation, as the consumers started looking at a very, very different lens towards shopping, we were able to very, very quickly pivot to that specific requirement. In fact, we had proactively moved to cloud. We had done a lot of other changes. In fact, everything has been very, very digital over the last few months. Right? In fact, if I look at Lowe's sales, right, every day over the last 2 quarters, our sales have been higher than our sales on a Black Friday, which talks about how we have been really tackling the whole problem very, very well, and being able to provide a safe environment for our consumers to shop and across the multi-channel touch points. Having said that, of course, there are problems that come because of these things as well. One such problem could be the difficulty in the supply chain, right, that we've been handling as well. Our teams are constantly working towards that. So there are different things that I'm seeing, but from the current scenario standpoint, it's not too difficult because we are prepared for that, and we've been able to cater to a very, very safe and secure environment for our consumers, both offline and online, or across the omni channels. When I look at the future, I think things are moving much faster than what most people are anticipated, because of which it's interesting how we are able to reimagine retail altogether. Our stores won't look the same. Our .com presence or channels won't look the same at all, right? And like, for example, everything in our stores are going to be responsive in the future, right? We're talking about very, very different level of responsive. Each consumer would probably look at a store in a very different way, or will be able to look at a store in a very, very different way. And the level of personalization will be a lot more. You're talking about technologies such as digital twins, IoT, quantum computing, all coming in together to create much more responsive stores. And when you talk about .com as well, you're talking again about a very, very tactile e-commerce environment, right? So things are changing very, very quickly. For us at Lowe's, we are constantly striving towards the next generation of technologies and readiness to explore how we can interact with the consumers and provide them a better interface.
So in your case, it's more accelerated with startups collaborating with you.
Oh, for sure. I mean, we have been looking at disruptive innovation since 2014 when we launched Lowe's Innovation Labs. And since then, we have actually, for example, 2014, we launched consumer-facing robots in stores, right? When no other retailer was looking at robotics in 2014, specifically consumer-facing. 2015, we were looking at extended aisles and a lot of AR, VR, and visualization applications. Again, when most of these AR, VR applications were being applied to real estate and gaming and other things, right? So we have continued to look at the same way, and that's primarily because we're looking at a long-term narrative-driven innovation. So when you look at those narrative-driven innovation pieces, we have specific goals and themes, and to apply that, we are always at every corner. We're looking for whether the technology is ready. Can we really provide that kind of a experience to our consumers, right? So with that, we're constantly looking ahead.
Okay. Anup, you can give us a bird's eye view from the Indian context, and some of your startups are also serving the global community. A little bit about Orios. I've given an introduction about you, but for the benefit of our audience, what does Orios do? And
Yeah,
then
sure.
let's go on to the post-pandemic world, please. Go on.
Yep, sure. So Orios is an early stage tech VC based out of India and focused on India only. And what that means is we select startups which are focused on the Indian consumer. Our partners come with operating experience. That's the differentiating thread that we have in our firm. And we walk the length and breadth of this country, literally speaking, in different markets, and therefore have a sense of intuition, data peeped into consumer homes, sort of had meals with them, things like that. So that makes us very intimate with the Indian consumer and the Indian business over here. We invest both B2B and B2C. Look, in the startup ecosystem, there is certainly an appetite to enhance their offerings to serve a global consumer and to seek parallels out so that you can have additional streams of revenue, additional application. In fact, as part of our acceleration program that we do from seed to Series A, we constantly invite entrepreneurs from Southeast Asia, which is probably a good sort of analogy of emerging markets. There's a clutch of emerging markets in there. Plus there is developed markets like Singapore and Hong Kong as well over there. So there are interesting learnings that come for our startups. There are partnerships. In fact, some of our startups are actively pursuing registrations and starting up business over there in those markets. There are certain domains which are more amenable. So there could be gaming, there could be health tech. These are very deep tech domains. They tend to be more amenable. In case of consumer startups like PharmEasy, for example, or Country Delight, they tend to serve the Indian market exclusively, but of course they tend to utilize also, and they're open to utilizing technologies which have been used in other parts of the world to make the consumer experience over here perceptibly different from what they're using right now, obviously at a low cost. Because in India is a very cost-sensitive market. You have to make high tech available over here at low cost. That's the game over here. You got millions of consumers, but you got to take the you can't take $1 out of them. You got to take some cents out of them, and that's how it converts into millions of dollars. So we're finding this the whole post-pandemic era very exciting. Models are being thought of, which are far more efficient. And collaboration is always on, and we encourage our startups to partner with all the kind of folks we have here in the panel to learn as much as they can, expose them to new technologies, new learnings, and really expand their horizons. And they're actively doing that. Yeah.
Okay, great point. Most of these startups, the early stage, at least they've been asking for a playbook. I mean, should they go to an accelerator when they go to a fund? But, do they want to I mean, they ask me, is there a playbook to handle the pandemic? And, Radhika, I wanted to allude to you, right? I mean, as this pandemic created value, I mean, as it increased the value offerings from a startup, when you talk about global synergies, are they, cross-pollinating or collaborating with the startup ecosystem that you have within your own fund? Are they working with different founders? Are there some best practices for this? And the same question for William, because you guys have global teams and your startups, are they collaborating with each other? That's a question. Radhika, over to you.
Yeah, absolutely, Vishal. So, our funds, as I mentioned, we're a global team. Just to set some context, we're a $500 million evergreen global multi-stage fund. And so the core areas, though, we look at a lot are new emerging technologies. So the way we think about it is, we're thinking about obviously new customer, new user experiences, next generation user experiences, whether it be in automotive and retail, we've talked about, in healthcare and education, and new experiences, but also the infrastructure that powers a lot of those experiences. So when we look at areas that we want to focus on, we also want to focus a lot on the infrastructure side, which is, we're on a Zoom call right now, for example, massive video streams, all running in the cloud. What powers these experiences? And that's where the infrastructure part comes in. With a lot of these new experiences, and we have robotics, AI, you need to process all of that data. You need to get intelligent about the data. What is the underlying infrastructure that powers a lot of that? And that's where we're thinking a lot about, and that's where a lot of the collaboration ends up being with a lot of the startups we end up investing in. So best practices in terms of how a large company like Samsung collaborates with startups, it can vary a lot. Either it could be a partnership, it could be a joint go-to-market, it could be a supplier relationship. And I think the biggest challenge startups really find is finding the right group. Given you have a corporate, maybe like Samsung, even like Lowe's, global with teams everywhere, who do you know is the right team to work with? And that's where the biggest challenge is. And that's where, teams like ours and Abhay's would probably be their champions, their doors to making sure they're connected with the right business units and making sure that that cycle of tapping into the right teams that can work with them is expedited. So that's the biggest challenge we see, and that's what we try to alleviate as well.
So in March and April, you would have probably immediately gone and sat with all your startups, right? Everybody, right? And obviously you brought in a very good angle here, the role of the corporate in ensuring that startups are not just their vendors, but looking at them as future innovation and protecting them. Okay. William, moving on to you, right? From your perspective, I also want you to bring in, how did the global industry react to working with startups? Because the first thing that industry drops would be a startup or a technology piece. They would say, okay, we'd sign with you 6-7 months later, right? And from your accelerator perspective, what did you see? How did you help your ecosystem collaborate at that point of time? And what value did you bring with global synergy? Over to you, William.
Yeah, sure. So one of the things that we did is we got started early. So I was in Asia during SARS. Then I've seen this movie before. So we got our startups prepped in January and February. Here in Shanghai, we were back in the office by early March. So we tried to get a jump on things. One of the great things about being a startup is you don't have that massive overhead. It doesn't take that much to move the ship. You're a lot more nimble. So we took advantage of that. Out of the 136 active portfolio companies in my cross-border internet portfolio right now, we only had to recap one company.
That's superb. That is superb. Only one company.
Offline, I mean, we had a bunch of travel companies where we fired the entire team and went into hibernation, and we had one that pivoted into selling makeup, and they're doing very well selling makeup now. But we had to recap one just because they were in the offline event space and selling tickets, and that was really rough. and they had some liabilities. But the key is to really pivot quickly. And the second thing is we really focus on corporate partnerships. I mean, we're partnered with a different part of Samsung, but one of their investments in India called Flixtree, got backing last year, a small like a few $1 million round, and that partnership has really worked well. Where we don't have to pay lots of money for marketing. We don't have that much of an expense. In fact, it's go profitable first, then raise money. And so through the pandemic, as everybody was, looking for things to watch on their phones, they're bored out of their minds because they can't really work and they're stuck at home. And so they want to watch video. And so they watch Samsung video on Flixtree. And they've kind of gone through the roof recently. So we have a bunch of companies like that where through their corporate partnerships and through corporate backing, they've been able to really take advantage of this very difficult time. And it's not just in India, but increasingly going cross-border with those corporate partnerships. And in fact, we're working with, a bunch of our MOX companies are working with Samsung in Korea now as well, pre-installed in the factory on every Samsung Galaxy. So we're changing the model and helping, early stage startups fight against kind of big internet, Google, Facebook, Amazon, trying to. And so those partnerships between startups and corporates, especially in this tough time, becoming more and more important. And MOX is hopefully a bit of a gateway or a bridge, because as Radhika said, it's sometimes hard to find the right door to all these multinationals.
That is super interesting. You said by Google and Facebook, right? And when you talk about that, that's such a big statement. And you've seen the SARS movie before. That was a wonderful point you made too. Abhay, in your case, this would be true, right? For you want startups as partners, not just as vendors like an IT services company would call them. So talk about Lowe's perspective. What's been going on internally with these startups that you're collaborating with?
Sure, Vishal. To William and Radhika's point, right? I think I couldn't have agreed more. It's a time when you're looking for partners, right? In fact, we have been working with startups for quite a few years. In India, coincidentally, we launched our innovation program just in June, right? And we had to pivot ourselves very, very quickly as well, because at that point of time we were looking for a proper full-fledged accelerator, the physical model, and then we realized that it's just not going to be possible. And specifically when you're talking about when you're talking about hardware and software convergences, it's very difficult to sit and work from home and expect everyone to start working on hardware bits as well, right? And then how do you create that kind of environment? Can you start shipping some equipment back to the mini labs at homes and so on and so forth, right? So there are a lot of challenges, but partnerships at the end of the day prevail, right? In US, we've been working with, let's say, for example, a startup that we ended up having a multi-million-dollar deal with during the pandemic itself, right? Or the first quarter of pandemic itself. It combined or amalgamated 3 technologies. It combined AR/VR with LiDAR and video streaming. And that was something that was essential for our pro customers so that they could reach their end consumers, right, in a digital environment. So we did that, right? It was a multi-million-dollar deal that happened. With the startups that we partnered with in India, which is 8 of them, and this is our first cohort, right? We started looking at anything between about $20,000 to about $100,000 with each partnership that we went with them. Again, something that's not very obvious and very common in India, but then that's something that we took an approach towards. And then each of them, of course, depended upon the scope of work, right? So for us, partnerships are key, and we'll continue to strengthen those. Like again, William and Radhika mentioned that there are different types of partnerships, and we'll have to look at how do we kind of strategize those partnerships, right? Some of them, for example, have been able to raise funding. There's been a lot of conversation around during these tough times, have startups been able to raise funds? I would say 2 of the 8 startups that I'm closely working with, they just raised funds in the last quarter. So I think it's about having your vision clear, strategically executing that, and making sure you're much better equipped in terms of how do you handle such a situation, right? Now, this has happened for the first time, probably, or it's not the first time, but then, the impact that we're seeing is slightly different. And with that, there's certain areas which are, much more important from a consumer standpoint, be it a business or an end consumer. and how startups are pivoting to that is going to be very, very critical as well. So that's the kind of help that, us as corporates need to provide to them, apart from the financial help, right? And more so in terms of understanding the business requirements. And when we do that, the partnerships are much more streamlined towards developing or co-developing interesting solutions that are going to be very, very relevant for today.
William, a lot of the deep tech companies keep asking me, is it the right time to raise money? Because there's a long-term view. But there is also a clamping down of funding in terms of people saying that, okay, let's give it a few more months or a year or so to see if the market recovers, and then let's start investing in it. Because most of these deep tech companies also have to go to FDA approvals or clinical trials or something of that sort. So what's happening in that space?
So, I mean, we're global deep tech. What we're doing in India is generally deep tech enabled, but we apply it to a lot of traditional consumer problems and consumer internet. But we're also the most active investor in biotech in the world and in hardware. And in the first 7 months of this year, 8 months of this year to August, our company's closed $800 million US. That was mostly driven in the biotech and future food space and synthetic biology. But so think about traction first, and then fundraising second. Now for deep tech, traction may not actually be revenue, but you need to show progress towards delivering. And if you can do that, you can attract the capital. So we haven't seen anybody being shy around investing in this sort of future food, synthetic bio space. But they see the pathway to product that is very competitive in the market, and with this funding, they should be able to deliver. So even if you're not in the market yet with the product, if you can show that pathway to solving a big problem, you should be able to fundraise. And if not, just buckle down the hatches. We call it cockroach approach. But the only thing that as long as it doesn't kill you, it'll actually make you stronger. You might get stepped on a little bit, there's a couple legs, but keep on going. And so what happens when the funding environment goes away? Well, again, focus on traction, bring down the burn rate to the bank, and try and batten down the hatches and weather on through. And hopefully your existing investors and potentially some future ones will stand by you. So the one thing you should not do is stop communicating. So whether, most people psychologically, they stop communicating when things are bad and they only communicate when things are good. The entrepreneur, the CEO or the founder who continues to communicate with the community, with their backers, with their potential investors through this downturn will stand apart. Even when things are tough, and that really shows something to investors that in spite of tough times, they remain committed to the vision and to delivering on their promises in terms of targets, their objectives, and their KPIs.
Okay. So Radhika, coming down to you, I mean, whatever William mentioned at this point of time, that mobile is the center of everything, right? I mean, the deep tech startup that I was alluding to it's called Echo.Inc. Okay, and they're building an MRI on a phone. Can you beat that? That is real deep tech. And if that happens, you don't have to go sit in those clunky machines and feel claustrophobic, right? I mean, the mobile is the center. So what's happening in terms of mobile innovation? What kind of, Samsung's already advertising the fold phone and all that. I mean, the future is, it seems like I actually live in my phone all the time.
Yeah, no, I think the way we interact with the world right now is through our devices, right? And I think, again, the way we're thinking about it, we're thinking about the new experiences that get to you through those devices, whether it be through the phones, where a lot of our initiatives are, whether it's new experiences, AR, VR, whether it's through different types of devices, kiosks, in different places. I think when we think of deep tech, right, the one thing that works for deep tech companies is everybody knows it's a long-term horizon. deep tech startups inherently are a lot more resilient because it's a long journey to actually building and commercializing your product. There's a lot of, the name says it, there's a lot of deep core technology here. When we think about the new experiences, I think we just don't think about, the mobile phone that's delivering it. That's a big piece of it. We also think about the other infrastructure that has to power it. Samsung, we power a lot of the components and the semiconductor chips that go into large, massive clouds, as well as that go into the phones. We think about, new experiences that will come to you, not just through Wi-Fi, but through 5G that's coming in, and we're building a lot of that infrastructure as well. So through our investments, through what we see with our business units as well, it's a collaborative approach of how do you enable these new experiences through different mechanisms, and how do you power those experiences in such a seamless way to enable new experiences across different places. In the pandemic, I've become much more comfortable with telemedicine. We've heard of education, people are at home, learning, schools are all virtual. So all of the underlying infrastructure that's powering that through the things that I mentioned, that's what we get really excited about.
Abhay, in terms of deep tech for you, I remember one of your stores had in the US, in California especially, they had robots coming and greeting people. I know there was, I don't know if it was for more show, but the things worked because they would show you the map in the store and you could go pick up the item, right? At least in a home improvement store, that was a massive upscaling of an idea. So do you see more of those partnerships going through with you, and what does deep tech mean to Lowe's at this point of time?
Sure, Vishal. So, as I mentioned earlier, for us, we have categorized. Our intent is very simple, right? From a Lowe's Innovation Lab standpoint, it's dual in nature, but it's basically how do we solve for the problems that our consumers and associates are facing today. Which means that we are going to look at a lot of incremental innovation to solve for those problems, and then we are also looking at the futuristic approach in terms of how do we solve for the problems in the future, right? When I talk about that, there's a lot of deep tech, there's a lot of disruptive innovation that's going to be a part of that plan, right? And because of the same reason, we look at a narrative driven innovation pieces, or basically we have a bunch of different themes around which we try to explore different concepts to reach their end state, right? And that's an amalgamation of multiple technologies typically. So from a deep tech standpoint, we're gung about a lot of things. Right? We've been very strong at robotics. We've been working on robotics for a fairly long time now. Since our inception, 2014, we've been working on a lot of visualization layers. We built our own bogies and rigs for CGI. We have patents on a lot of those visualization techniques today. And we've been working very, very aggressively on visualization pieces, right? But apart from that, another bunch of things that we've been working on include haptics. We're looking heavily into haptics. We're looking heavily into digital twins, quantum computing, and a bunch of other technologies. And for which sometimes, it's not about building everything in-house. There are things that, we can build in-house. For example, we have got folks joining us from SpaceX, Tesla, people who have pioneered hyper reality, DVR, and so on and so forth, all part of the same team. But there's certain things that can be built in-house and certain things that you should be looking at partnerships through a partnerships lens. And that is what we are doing, right? We have taken a mixed approach towards doing that. There are certain pieces that we are building completely in-house. And for example, if I talk to you about haptics, right? What would be very interesting for me to see is that, when we talk about tactile e-commerce, that's the end state, Vishal. Now, to get to the tactile e-commerce environment where everything that you will probably explore in a store environment, in a physical environment, can you get that in a .com? Can I, using haptics, create a sensation of touch where, if someone is, for example, creating their work from home environment, their work from home corner in their homes, at that point of time, if they want to look at a table or if they want to look at a leather chair versus a different fabric, can they touch and feel all those things sitting at home? And through that, haptics is going to play a major role, right? And we are trying to explore through that, how people can create that sense of feeling, right? Another thing that I would talk about, a startup that we're working with in India called Rephrase. It's a week back that they sent me a video for my birthday wishes, and basically the video was built it seems like it's a studio shot video with a particular model wishing me a lot of good wishes, but basically this is hyper reality. Now imagine the same technique being applied to your .com, where anyone going to your .com environment is not greeted through a chatbot. There's a digital avatar of a hyper-personalized human who's going to be interacting with you through democratization of expertise and be able to talk to you about everything that you need in a very humanized way. Now that experience is going to be much more better. There's going to be democratization expertise. There's going to be as humanized as possible responses. And as part of as a matter of fact, as part of the POC, they're going to create a digital clone on me. So I'm the first scapegoat on whom they're trying this on. And probably after 3 months, I'm going to see how they're able to using AI or hyper reality. They're able to clone my voice or modulate my voice, plus also my facial expressions, my emotions, my face, the tonality of my voice, and so on and so forth. And is that really as good as a human or not? So there are a lot of things that we are trying and testing it on. A lot of these things require a huge amount of computing capabilities, and for that, quantum computing is the need of the hour. So there are a lot of things that we are currently doing from a deep tech standpoint, and hopefully, in the next few years, we'll see some amazing stuff coming out as well.
Yeah, I have a last couple of questions before we close it, but that's amazing. All these technologies that were in the realm of science fiction, I mean, the pandemic seems to only accelerate it with collaboration. It seems the pandemic was tailor-made for these technologies to actually take off. And that's interesting. And I'm glad you're one of the few guys who heads the corporate world to come and say that the startup has used me as a case study, which is wonderful. Anup, I want to get to you. And some of your startups are disrupting the D2C world, the media and entertainment world, right? What sort of impact will these startups make going forward? Or is it just, or will people go back to the old ways? For example, we're talking about Country Delight and the way they look at milk as a category in understanding me personally and delivering the kind of milk that me and my family consume, right? And they have a lot of value add categories. In this hyper personalized world, what sort of impact will these startups have?
Look, the hyper personalization, and I was giving the Amazon example, and of course we've got our own, folio company, Country Delight, which disrupted this $70 billion market of milk and dairy products, and now bread and eggs as well, for which there is no brand in India. On the Western shelves, you've got more than 10 different brands or varieties of even eggs if you were to walk into a Western supermarket, but that was not the case in India. And that's beginning to emerge. Product and price segments, you can make tons of them in India because we are a pyramidal society. We're not a rhombus when it comes to GDP per capita. So it is quite understood that for every $1 drop in price, there's a couple of million people waiting out there to try that offering and sustain that offering. Should you be able to provide them just that enough value so that you can make money and they can get that perceptible difference in experience than what they were doing earlier. And D2C brands is definitely our thesis. We don't believe in channels anymore, particularly when it comes to consumer brands. You don't need to hire a market research agency to get intimate with your consumer. You have the data directly being shipped to them every day, every minute, every hour. Because they have it in their mobile devices. And thanks to all the technology that I'm hearing on this panel, it's becoming more and more intimate. And in fact, there's too much data to handle. So, Country Delight did just that. They just thought of a positioning. They said fresh and pure is what I'm going to stand for. And wherever consumers have a problem with freshness and purity in whatever they're consuming with their families, I'm going to go and enter those categories. It was as simple as that. Right? I mean, you have an example of Whole Foods in the US, which was later on acquired by Amazon, etc., which stands for exactly that. And they built an off-peak logistics model, which is getting into your home every day on a subscription model, negative working capital. And they are so intimate with the consumer, they were able to introduce white and brown bread, free of colors and preservatives. They were able to introduce protein-rich eggs, which is free of antibiotics, hormones, and any other artificial agents. And there will be a whole host of products you can imagine which have the same kind of insight built around it. So they just spoke to their consumers. They saw what they were willing to pay, the price premium that they're paying versus established brands like Amul and Mother Dairy, which are absolutely 70% market share of this entire industry, is just 20%. Now that's when you start building a whole new segment, which can result in $1 billion business tomorrow. If the price difference is going to be 2x and 3x, you're walking away from most of the market and you're trying to create a very, very small niche. And that's not attractive for at least venture capital investors because that can't grow to a big size at all. So yeah,
Anup, you can this company that you're mentioning, the collaboration could be they could go tie up with the cult.fit tomorrow. They could tie up with any kind of any retailer, maybe all these also nutritional science companies also, right? There are many of them now with the wearable
oh,
fitness
absolutely.
companies,
So
garments.
yeah, so one of our investee companies, CityCash, has brought about this NFC-based payment. Now that's been popular all over the world. There's Oyster, Octopus, EasyLink, Suica in Japan, whatever, and they're just going to sign up, and they have got one signed up contract already with Public Bus Transport Corporation. There are 200 million Indian consumers who are doing micropayments less than $2 for public transit, and all the transactions which happen at these transit hubs, because their entire lives revolve around that. They go and have their meals at this transit hub before boarding a bus. When they come back, they are basically, taking a paratransit like an e-rickshaw or a three-wheeler, and then they're eating, and consuming products and services at that transit hub. Now, all that economy was off the radar, both for the merchants and the consumers. When you start wrapping these payments, you could do credit, and that's how you build layers of, formal credit and financing, and build a whole ecosystem of consumer products and services. Now, that kind of data, when it's crunched, can become very attractive to a Procter & Gamble to reach out to consumers through an SMS, versus trying to spray and pray an expensive advertisement over a YouTube channel or a TV advertising. So I think this hyper personalization is getting very, very real. We just need the right sharp instrument at a low cost. And we've got that today in the form of a mobile phone. We just need the right proposition to build that bridge.
Okay, that's wonderful. William, we often ignore the role of academia here. In the last 3-4 months, I've been noticing a lot of deep tech companies coming to me. And a lot of the investors say that, why don't you get your technology certified by academia at this point of time? Because anyway, the world is not going to start buying your product immediately. So you go partner with academia, see what these big professors tell you. Would you agree with this kind of an approach? And also, I want you to advise on entrepreneurs, what should they be doing over the next 6 months to 1 year?
Sure. So I think academia is a great place to explore, but you have to spend half your time writing proposals for grants, right? And so the amount of time you actually do real work in the science that you're focused on is maybe 30, 40, 50% of the time. A lot of your time is wasted. With bringing academia out is a lot of academics find becoming an entrepreneur quite scary. Maybe in traditional programming, sure, but you're talking about biotech or some of these other areas, deep science, pure science, it's scary because there's no structure, there's no path. And so what we try and do through our Indie Bio and Hacks programs and even in mocks is provide a framework to enable scientists to become entrepreneurs. And so they have a structure. We fund them and let them focus just on turning that science into a solution, into something that can actually be delivered into the market. Now it's still a long journey, but it's a lot. When you can use a lab whenever you want. You don't have to write an application every 6 months to get more money. Now, in terms of validation, I don't think academia is the right place to go validate the technology. I think the market's a better place to go validate the technology. Professors make amazing advisors, but the proof is in the actual data. And so go out to the market to the extent possible, try and get data from the market to bring validation. And if the science is not actually there yet, sure, get peer-reviewed journal articles out there, publish, but get that stamp of approval. But once you have that, it's time to go out into the market.
Okay. And in your general advice to entrepreneurs, 6 to 12 months, and also the fact that how large corporate are changing. Also, if you could mention how industries like media and automobile maybe are changing too in terms of working with startups. Is that going to accelerate more or less, please?
So the S&P 500 companies, on average, are now on the S&P 500 for less than 16 years. So we're partnered with many multinationals. We're running innovation programs over the last years and currently for 5 of the top 10 consumer products companies in the world, like J&J, Unilever, AB InBev, Nestle, and the number 2 I can't talk about. And 2 of those 5, invested in our fund. So they're more and more open to working with startups who bring outside innovation into their companies, because they're just under so much pressure from venture-backed competitors. There's so much VC money going into consumer at this point that it's not each other that they should be afraid of. It's the next startup coming up behind them. During this tough time, the small startups and the big startups, the big corporates do have a bit of an advantage. One is smaller and nimbler. The other one has the capital to weather through. So for entrepreneurs over the next 6 to 12 months, get aggressive. If you're still alive, you got to get aggressive. Survive through. Yeah, the companies that can survive a very difficult time will come out a lot stronger. You look at the leaders over the last 100 years; they always were born because there's less money around, and you can get that top talent to join. It's not as competitive as during a bubble period. So go out there, get aggressive, stay alive, and if you want to work with us, get in touch.
I will. I mean, I have emails of all of you. So I'm first thing I'm going to do is put all 4 of you together, 3 of you together rather. And then, I'm going to start sending you the names in common, because I'm sure that after this interaction, a lot of startups will write to me. And Radhika, this is the world of APIs. I mean, any form of collaboration today has to be with APIs. Your thoughts on how, deep tech and consumer tech can merge, like Anup was saying, right? Many of these new models are emerging. Your thoughts in the next 6 to 12 months, and what kind of technologies would you bet on?
Yeah, I think, if you look at the pandemic, there's a lot of sectors that have actually gotten tailwinds because of the pandemic. And we talked about the Fintech ecosystem. That's a pretty big one, for example, right? In the US, you think of banks have traditional branch infrastructure. All of them had to accelerate and move to digital. What would have happened over the next 5 years anyway got compressed into the next 5 months. And what that meant was, within Fintech, for example, there's a whole new API economy where these API companies, and we have a portfolio company called Solaris Bank that's actually in Europe, where what they do is they provide a layer of APIs. And what does the API do? It's a banking as a service. So you have APIs that a company like Samsung can come in and say, hey, we have the customer relationship, we have the mobile ecosystem. We'll leverage your APIs to get an entire banking backend, for example, and then we'll build a consumer experience on top of that. So we own the experience, but you're powering that entire infrastructure for us. So I think, in a lot of these industries, we're going to see, and we've seen that already, I think, in the enterprise space with AI, machine learning, it's all developer tools are all about APIs as well. Unlike William, we don't shy away from hardware. We actually embrace that because, again, it's at the core of what we do. And where APIs also really help is, interfacing between the hardware and software. So a lot of our hardware companies, you say for a hardware company, you say they've won the hardware lottery if the software is ready. When their hardware is ready, that can utilize the hardware. So we actually have another, portfolio company here in the US called Sambanova Systems. That's out of Stanford.
Okay.
So we talked about academics, came from academia, and they really said, we're building a new type of hardware that can help you make AI algorithms much faster. But we also need that layer of APIs in the middle that can enable developers to come in and build on top of that hardware. So we see, APIs, I mentioned a few different examples. We see them everywhere. I think it's going to get even more established, this API economy in many more sectors as well. And that'll also help with the collaboration that we talked about previously. That's really important.
That's well said, Radhika. I think Tech for Good is a topic that I would love to go in detail. Abhay, I think in your program, Tech for Good is going to be part of your program. And what do you see entrepreneurs doing 12 months, your advice from the Lowe's India perspective and Build for the Globe perspective?
Sure. So this year we've already started looking at sustainability as a concept, right? And how sustainability could be looked at holistically and be applied to Lowe's, right? So one of the startups that we're working on is a nanotechnology startup, and we focused on building the basic building blocks of homes using graphene and other additives, right? Nanocomposites that can ensure that the new generation or next generation of homes are very, very different, that we start considering homes as a living entity, if I can say that, right? Instead of just consumers being our consumers, let us place homes as our consumers, right? Let them talk to us, let them breathe, and try to understand every point, from their history to their heritage and so on and so forth, and then try to understand all the home data points, and how, if we are able to make it more from a circular economy standpoint or circularity standpoint, if we are able to plug in a lot of these elements, then the carbon rating drops drastically, right? And we have the whole ecosystem working together. We have pro customers who are going to be building these homes. We have DIYers, we have millennials, we have Gen Z who are going to be our future shoppers as well, right? And they will probably start looking at your carbon ratings, or the whole concept around how you're utilizing carbon as a very
Yeah.
important source. So that amount of transparency is going to be very, very important in the future, and those are consumers in the future as well, right? So a lot of these things are going to be plugged into our program going forward as well. And from a deep tech standpoint as well, like I mentioned earlier, right, there's huge amount of scope. I think in the next 1 year we're probably going to see a lot of home data working that's going to happen, right? I think Radhika was talking about the data centers as well, and the power consumption there too. People perceive retail as something that's going to probably shut shop eventually, right? I was just talking to someone, and we were told that can we create more power conscious and cost conscious data centers in the 2,200 stores that we have that will personalize every interaction. And I said, yeah, I mean that's brilliant, right? You're talking about 2,200 data centers who are going to be part of the stores itself, are going to be power conscious, are going to be cost conscious as well, right? So there are lots of things that we are trying to work towards, emerging technologies, as well as making sure that it's more circular in nature.
No, that's fantastic. And Abhay, I wish you all the best with Lowe's. And Anup, you're going to have the final word. Where are we heading next 6 months from an investing perspective and a leadership perspective? And a word of advice on resilience for entrepreneurs for 6 to 12 months, please.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that point out on resilience. This is one additional quality that we have started to look at very carefully before making investments. And in the last 6 months, where the investment decisions have been largely made on Zoom calls, we're not going to get an opportunity to meet anyone. So we spend a lot of time communicating and getting a feel and doing ref checks, etc. This is one really tenacious ability to hang in there and hang in with your team, and not have pop-outs and dropouts and cop-outs. That is something that we are definitely looking at as one of the attributes in a post-pandemic situation. So the ability of the team to survive through a crisis, not play the blame game, sacrifice growth to ensure that you have survival, making some of those decisions, I think, are extremely important, because decision making in the investing world is, and I think William mentioned, that is also getting extended. So that's one part of it. On the sectoral significance, I think travel, leisure, mobility, I think as it kicks back, the whole world will kick back. But I think the non-discretionary spend areas, education, health tech, these are real growth areas, very high interest areas. People are carefully looking at themselves in the mirror like they've never looked before, because it's often, I've never looked at myself for so long in a day, but thanks to Zoom calls, I'm doing that. So, it's changing the way that I eat and drink and look at everything around me. Home improvement has become a big theme. People are suddenly realizing all the cracks in their homes. They want to change the upholstery. They're getting bored with everything around them. They think things don't function. All of this is giving rise to new businesses, and that's the spend that you've got to capture. That's the reliance, the over reliance, like Abhay and Radhika were mentioning. On your mobile device, that's your first port of call. Earlier, you used to meet people offline and say, "Hey, let's stay connected through LinkedIn." Now it's like you're discovering everybody online, and then you're going to decide who you're going to meet offline. So it's there are some people who I will never meet offline in my life, and I don't want to meet them. And maybe it's the same with them as well. So I think the whole interpersonal dynamics, all of that has changed. I think, so sectors which are really growing are sectors which are value adding to consumers' lives. They are examining their lives much more minutely than ever before. I mean, people are deferring, courses. Nobody wants to pay $100,000 for education online and just a degree. So, all these are changes. I mean, education is going to undergo a massive change. It's not going to be real estate oriented in the years to come. There's going to be more fluidity. There's going to be more emphasis on experience. So I think lots of changes. So we have to listen to these changes and then invest in those sectors.
That's fantastically said, Anup. And I think what William, Abhay, and Radhika would echo with what you're saying. And I think, guys, for the entrepreneurs watching this, right, to build global synergies, all you have to do is send an email or a nice introduction about yourself, and I'm sure people will get back to you. That's the first step to enabling innovation. If you have great ideas, just write to all of us, and obviously in a very short and succinct format, not with a lot of history. And it'll be wonderful if you write to us so that this team here, William from SOSV, Abhay from Lowe, Radhika from the Samsung Catalyst Fund, and Anup from Orios Venture Partners, they do answer a lot of emails. They do look at a lot of startups, by the way. Guys, just ask and synergies will happen, okay? On that note, stay safe. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I'll get in touch with you personally. Radhika, Abhay, William, Anup, thank you. And have a good one, guys. Thank you for coming to the program. Bye, guys. On that note, keep enjoying TechSparks. Keep the questions going, guys. Bye-bye.